High Commander Zextal reclined in their command throne, the crystalline viewport before them offering an unobstructed view of the vast cosmic ocean. Their upper eyes tracked the movement of their mighty fleet, while their lower set focused on the latest conquest reports. 15 ships of the line, each one a masterpiece of Gatherian engineering, moved in perfect formation through the void. The soft purple glow of their quantum drives painted the command deck in ethereal light. Another successful cycle. Excellence, Sub-Commander Vixna announced, their scales shifting to a pleasant shade of green gold that denoted pride. 6 species added to the Empire's repository. The Council will be most pleased. Zextal's scales rippled with satisfaction as they took another sip of fermented nectar, the liquid shimmering with bioluminescent particles. The vintage was from their personal estate on the Gatherian homeworld, a reminder of the privileges that came with being the Empire's most successful exploration commander. Indeed, Zextal replied, their voice a melodious mixture of subsonic frequencies that made the bridge crew's scales tingle. Though I must admit, these recent acquisitions have been disappointingly simple. Where are the challenges our ancestors faced? The great spacefaring empires they spoke of. The bridge crew exchanged knowing looks. Their commander's thirst for glory was well known throughout the fleet. 6 primitive species in a single cycle was an impressive achievement, but Zextal always yearned for more. Commander, the sensor officer's scales flashed urgent purple. Long-range scans are detecting unusual energy signatures from the 3rd planet of the system we're approaching. Zextal's upper eyes swiveled toward the holographic display that materialized before them. The star system was unremarkable. A yellow dwarf star with 9 planets, only one of which appeared to harbor life. The energy readings were sporadic, suggesting nuclear fission experiments at best. Probability of technological advancement? Zextal asked, more out of protocol than interest. Preliminary scans indicate a level 3 civilization. Excellence, the science officer reported. They've achieved basic spaceflight and nuclear fission, but no signs of quantum technology or consciousness transfer capabilities. Their most advanced weapons appear to be chemical propellant-based. A ripple of amusement passed through the bridge crew. Chemical propellants. Even the youngest species in the Empire had advanced beyond such primitive technology. Very well, Zextal said, setting aside their drinking vessel. Standard first contact protocols. Deploy the fleet in attack formation Delta. Let's give these primitives a proper introduction to the greater galaxy. The command deck hummed with activity as orders were relayed. The 15 ships of the Gatherian fleet began to shift, their crystalline hulls refracting starlight in a dazzling display of power. Each vessel was nearly 5 kilometers long, armed with the most advanced weapons in known space. Excellence, Vixna interjected, their scales showing a hint of concern. The energy readings, there's something unusual about their pattern. They don't match any known technological progression we've encountered. Zextal dismissed the concern with a casual wave of their upper appendage. Every species develops differently, Sub-Commander, but they all end up in the same place, under the enlightened guidance of the Gatherian Empire. The fleet continued its advance toward the solar system, its commanders confident in their superiority. None of them noticed the subtle distortions in space around Jupiter, where something much larger than their entire fleet lay in wait. Prepare the first contact package, Zextal ordered, their scales now glowing with anticipation. Let's see how quickly these primitives submit when they witness the true power of the Empire. The bridge crew hurried to comply, each of them eager to play their part in what they assumed would be another simple conquest. After all, how could a species that still used chemical weapons possibly resist the might of the Gatherian Empire? Little did they know, they were about to learn a harsh lesson about the dangers of underestimating humanity. The massive form of Jupiter dominated the fleet's view screens, its swirling storms creating mesmerizing patterns that drew the eye. High Commander Zextal was about to order another scan of the third planet when every sensor on the bridge screamed to life. Spatial distortion detected. The sensor officer's scales flashed alarming shades of red and white. Something's emerging from behind the gas giant. The bridge crew watched in fascination as a massive shape emerged from Jupiter's shadow. The vessel that appeared defied every principle of Gatharian ship design, where their ships were elegant crystal spires that flowed like frozen water. This thing was all hard angles and brutal efficiency. Its hull was a deep, intimidating gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Size comparison, Zextal demanded, all four eyes fixed on the holographic display. The vessel is 7 kilometers in length, Excellence. The science officer's voice carried a note of disbelief. Nearly twice the size of our largest ship. But the design is primitive. They're using physical armor plating instead of energy fields. A wave of laughter rippled through the bridge. Even Zextal's scales shifted to the bright yellow of amusement. The idea of using metal as protection, when energy shields had been standard for millennia, was almost too ridiculous to consider. Look at those weapon emplacements, Sub-Commander Vixna pointed out, their voice thick with derision. They're using kinetic weapons. Actual projectiles. Excellence. This species hasn't even mastered basic particle beam technology. The massive human ship hung in space before them, its surface dotted with what the Gatharians recognized as missile tubes and projectile weapons. Large rails ran along its length, which their analysis suggested were some sort of primitive mass accelerator system. Scan their power systems, Zextal ordered, already planning how they would display this technological curiosity in the Imperial Museum. Excellence, we're detecting nuclear fusion reactors. The science officer's report brought another round of amused color changes from the crew. No quantum core, no antimatter production facilities. Their propulsion system appears to be based on conventional physics. Zextal rose from their command throne, their scales now glowing with the deep purple of absolute confidence. Send the standard contact package. Let's see how these primitives react to a proper display of advanced civilization. The communications officer transmitted the Empire's first contact message, a carefully crafted combination of mathematical equations, scientific principles, and clear demands for submission. It had worked on every species they'd encountered so far. Excellence, the tactical officer called out. They have active targeting systems, but they're using radar and lidar, actual electromagnetic scanning technology. This drew the loudest laugh yet from the bridge crew. The idea of a spacefaring race still using such ancient technology was beyond comedy. It was almost sad. Look at their hull construction, one junior officer pointed out. They're using external heat radiators. They haven't even mastered basic thermal phase shifting. Zextal settled back into their command throne, already composing the victory report in their mind. Deploy the fleet in standard subjugation formation. Let's show these primitives what real space combat technology looks like. The 15 ships of the Gatharian fleet spread out in a perfect geometric pattern, their crystalline hulls catching the light of the distant sun. Each ship's quantum core hummed with enough power to reduce a continent to ash, their energy shields capable of shrugging off any known weapon in the galaxy. Excellence, the communications officer called out. The primitive vessel is responding. Put it on display, Zextal ordered, expecting either panic or immediate surrender. What they got instead would haunt the Gatharian Empire for generations to come. But for now, they remained blissfully unaware that they were about to learn why humanity's engineers had chosen to make their ships look so primitive. and why that choice would prove to be one of the most brilliant military deceptions in galactic history. The response from the human vessel came not as a return data package, but as a direct communications link. The signal bypassed every encryption protocol the Gatharians had in place, slicing through their security as if it didn't exist. What shocked them even more was the voice that filled their command deck. Gatharian vessel ZX-397, under command of High Commander Zextal. Captain Amanda Blackwood's voice rolled through their bridge in perfect High Gatharian, each subsonic frequency precisely modulated. You have entered restricted space. This system is under the protection of the United Earth Federation. Zextal's scales lost all color, fading to a pale gray of shock. The human had not only spoken in their language, but had used the noble dialect, a complex series of harmonics that took Gatharian youth years to master. Even more disturbing, they knew their ship's designation and commander's name. Impossible, Sub-Commander Vixna whispered, their own scales showing patterns of confusion and fear. Our database shows no prior contact with this species. How could they know our language? The human captain continued, her voice carrying the same calm authority that Gatharian fleet admirals use to command entire armies. Your vessels will power down weapons and shields, then retreat beyond the orbit of Saturn. You have 10 minutes to comply. Zextal found their voice, though their scales still showed signs of distress. This is High Commander Zextal of the Gatharian Empire. You dare to give orders to the most advanced civilization in known space. Your primitive vessel. High Commander, Blackwood interrupted, something like amusement coloring her tone. Your empire has conquered 6 pre-industrial species in the past standard year. Your fleet uses quantum-based technology that you purchased from the Zinthari Trade Confederation 2 centuries ago. Your personal command codes were updated 3 days ago after a failed infiltration attempt by the Nexus Rebellion. Complete silence fell over the bridge. Every piece of information the human had just revealed was classified at the highest levels of the Empire. Even most of the bridge crew hadn't known about the recent code change. How? The science officer's voice trembled. How could they know all this? You are making a critical error of judgment, Commander Zextal, Blackwood continued. You assume that because we don't use your technology, we must be primitive. Has it occurred to you that we might have chosen a different path? The tactical officer's console suddenly lit up. Excellence. I'm detecting multiple small objects separating from the human vessel. They appear to be weapon platforms of some kind. Impossible, Zextal said again, but with less conviction. Our sensors would have detected any launch. Those are not launches, Commander. Blackwood's voice had lost its hint of amusement. They were always there. You're only seeing them now because we're allowing you to. This is your final warning. Retreat or face the consequences of your aggression. Zextal's upper eyes met their sub-commander's gaze, seeing their own uncertainty reflected back. Everything about this encounter was wrong. The humans knew too much, acted too confidently, and showed none of the fear that every other species had displayed when facing the might of the Empire. They're bluffing, Zextal declared, their scales forcing themselves back to the purple of confidence. No primitive chemical weapons could possibly harm our shields. Destroyer Vanguard 1, move to firing position. Show these humans the price of defiance. As the destroyer broke formation, Captain Blackwood's final message came through. Very well. Remember, in the minutes to come, we tried to be diplomatic. The destroyer's commander, ever eager for glory, began charging their main weapon banks. None of them realized that the human vessel had already launched its response several minutes ago. The laws of physics, as the Gatharians understood them, were about to be rewritten in fire and light. Destroyer Vanguard 1 moved forward with the graceful arrogance that characterized all Gatharian military operations. its crystalline hull pulsed with power as the quantum core channeled energy to its forward weapon arrays. Commander Lexthi stood proudly on their bridge, already imagining the accolades they would receive for being the first to fire upon this mysterious human vessel. Target locked, Commander, their weapons officer reported. Their primitive sensors haven't even detected our targeting arrays. The UEA's Thermopyla hung motionless against the backdrop of Jupiter, its gray hull still absorbing light in that peculiar way that had initially caught their attention. The small objects they detected earlier had vanished from their sensors entirely. Clearly nothing more than a failed attempt at intimidation. Begin power-up sequence for the main particle cannon, Lexthi ordered. Let's show these humans what real space combat looks like. The destroyer's main weapon began its charging cycle, the crystal lattice of the hull resonating with the building energy. That's when their sensor officer's scales suddenly flashed pure white. Multiple fast-moving objects detected. They screamed, "Speed, this can't be right." Reading relative velocity at 0.99 c. Impossible, Lexthi barked. Nothing material can move that fast in real space. But the objects, now recognized as some form of missile, were already proving them wrong. The Gatharian destroyer's advanced targeting systems couldn't even track them properly. Their velocities were so high that relativistic effects made their positions uncertain. Shields at maximum, Lexthi ordered, but it was already too late. The first human missile struck the destroyer's quantum shields. The Gatharians expected their energy barriers to simply deflect the primitive projectile. Instead, the missile passed through their most advanced defensive technology, as if it wasn't there. The physics were simple but devastating. At velocities so close to light speed, the time dilation effect meant that from the missile's perspective, the shield's energy field existed for such an infinitesimally brief moment that it might as well not have existed at all. Breach in sectors 7 through 12. Someone shouted. The hull, it's just gone. The second missile struck before anyone could process what had happened with the first. This one carried a payload of antimatter, perfectly contained until the moment of impact. The resulting explosion didn't just damage the destroyer. It erased a perfect sphere of space-time, roughly 500 meters in diameter. From the Gatharian flagship's perspective, the destruction of Vanguard 1 was unlike anything they'd ever witnessed. There was no dramatic explosion, no fire in space. One moment their most advanced destroyer existed, and the next it was simply gone, replaced by a brief flash of light that their sensors couldn't even properly categorize. By the first egg, Zextal whispered, their scales now a mottled pattern of terror and confusion. What kind of weapons are these? Captain Blackwood's voice returned to their command channel, still maintaining that eerily professional tone. That was a demonstration of a standard relativistic antimatter missile. Would you like to see what our advanced weapons can do? The science officer was frantically analyzing the sensor data. Excellence. The human weapons. They're not using any technology we understand. They've found ways to weaponize the fundamental laws of physics themselves. Impossible, Zextal said again, but this time the word carried no conviction. All advanced species follow the same technological path. The quantum-based technology we use is the peak of possible development. An interesting theory, Blackwood replied, having apparently heard their internal communication. But consider this. What if isolation forced us to find different solutions? While your empire was buying its technology from trading partners, we had to develop everything from scratch. No preconceptions, no limitations, just human ingenuity and the scientific method. The bridge crew watched in horror as multiple launch signatures appeared around the Thermopyla. This time, they could see the weapons clearly. The humans were done hiding their capabilities. The silence on the Gatharian command deck was absolute. Even the usually ever-present hum of the quantum core seemed muted, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. High Commander Zextal's scales had settled into a sickly gray-green pattern that none of their crew had ever seen before. Analysis. They finally managed to croak out. "Tell me everything about that weapon." The science officer's hands trembled as they manipulated the holographic controls. The display showed the final moments of Destroyer Vanguard 1 from multiple angles, each view more terrifying than the last. The missiles. The science officer's voice cracked. "They're unlike anything in our database. The velocity alone should be impossible. At 0.99 times light speed, the kinetic energy would be..." They paused, running the calculations again, equal to approximately 50 megatons of nuclear payload. And that's before we factor in the antimatter warhead. "But our shields," Zextal protested weakly. "They're based on quantum field technology. Nothing can penetrate them." The science officer's scales shifted to pure white, the color of fundamental understanding. "Excellence, that's exactly what makes these weapons so brilliant. They don't need to penetrate our shields because, from their frame of reference, they interact with them for less than a picosecond. It's like trying to stop a laser with a rotating fan blade. No matter how fast the blade spins, the light will always pass through the gaps." Sub-Commander Vixna leaned forward, their own scales showing patterns of deep concern. "Are you saying there's no defense against these weapons?" "Not with our current technology," the science officer admitted. "Our entire defense doctrine is based on energy shields and quantum field manipulation. These humans, they've taken a completely different approach. They're not just using physics, they're weaponizing the very laws of reality." The tactical display updated, showing new readings from the human vessel. What they saw made several junior officers' scales turn gray with nausea. "Those launch tubes we detected earlier." The tactical officer's voice was barely a whisper. "They're not launch tubes at all. They're linear accelerators. The entire ship is one massive weapon system designed to accelerate projectiles to relativistic velocities. The metal hull we mocked. It's not for protection. It's a heat sink for the massive energy requirements of their systems." Zextal watched as new data poured in. Their most advanced sensors were finally starting to make sense of the human ship's design, and every new discovery brought fresh horror. "Those aren't external radiators either," the engineering officer added. "They're quantum field manipulators of some kind. But the design, it's like nothing we've ever seen. They're not using them for defense or propulsion. They're using them to bend space-time itself." Captain Blackwood's voice returned to their command channel, each word landing like a physical blow. "I can hear your analysis, Commander Zextal. Your scientists are quite perceptive. Would you like me to fill in the gaps in their understanding?" The casual offer sent chills through the entire bridge crew. The humans weren't just defeating them. They were offering to explain how they were doing it. "Why?" Zextal found themselves asking. "Why show us this?" "Because the Gatharian Empire needs to understand something fundamental about humanity," Blackwood replied. "We don't want your territory. We don't want your technology. What we want is to be left alone to develop at our own pace. Consider this a practical demonstration of why that's in everyone's best interest." The science officer's console suddenly lit up with new alerts. "Excellence, I'm detecting energy signatures from the human ship that shouldn't be possible. They're creating localized areas where the laws of physics simply stop working." As if to demonstrate this point, several small objects detached from the thermobula. The Gatharian crew watched in mute horror as these devices moved in ways that violated every known law of motion, taking paths through space that should have been impossible. High Commander Zextal's pride finally shattered under the weight of fear and desperation. Their scales shifted through a cascade of colors before settling into the deep red of combat alert. "All ships, battle formation." They roared. Launch everything we have. Show these humans the full might of the Gatherian Empire. The remaining 14 ships of the fleet moved with practiced precision, their crystalline hulls blazing with energy as weapon systems charged to maximum power. Quantum torpedoes, particle beams, and plasma lances, every advanced weapon in their arsenal prepared to fire. Captain Blackwood's response was almost gentle. "You're making a mistake, Commander, but perhaps you need to see more to understand." The space around the Thermopylae suddenly blossomed with activity. What the Gatherians had initially dismissed as debris or sensor ghosts revealed themselves. Hundreds of combat drones, each about the size of a small shuttle. They moved in ways that made the alien crew's eyes hurt, following trajectories that should have been impossible. By the first egg, the tactical officer whispered, "Those drones, they're creating their own localized space-time bubbles." The science officer's analysis came through in a panicked burst. "Excellence, the drones are using some kind of field technology to bend space around themselves. They're not moving through space. They're moving space itself." The Gatherian fleet opened fire. The void between the ships lit up with every color of the spectrum as quantum torpedoes, particle beams, and plasma weapons discharge in a display of force that could have cracked a small moon. None of it mattered. The human drones danced through the barrage as if it wasn't there. Where particle beams should have hit, space itself curved away. Quantum torpedoes found themselves emerging from their space-time tunnels in empty void, their targets having casually stepped outside normal physics to avoid them. "Impossible," Sub-Commander Vixna shouted. "Our targeting systems can't lock onto them. It's like they're everywhere and nowhere at once." The drones began their counterattack. They didn't fire weapons. They simply touched the Gatherian ships. Wherever they made contact, the crystalline hulls simply stopped existing. It wasn't destruction in any normal sense. Rather, the points of contact simply ceased to operate under normal physical laws. "What are they doing to our ships?" Zextal demanded. The science officer's response was almost a whimper. "They're creating localized zones where our matter can't exist. The atomic bonds just stop working." "Excellence, they're not destroying our ships. They're telling physics itself to ignore parts of them." Captain Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos again. "This is a demonstration of our BA-level technology, Commander. Would you like to see what our advanced systems can do?" The threat hung in space along with the wreckage of 3 Gatherian ships that had already fallen to the drone swarm. The remaining vessels tried to coordinate their fire, to create some kind of defense against these physics-defying weapons, but it was like fighting against the universe itself. "Excellence," the communications officer called out. "I'm detecting massive energy spikes from the human vessel." The Thermopylae's hull began to glow with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The space around it rippled like the surface of a pond, causing several Gatherian sensor systems to simply shut down rather than try to process what they were seeing. "Final warning, Commander Zextal," Blackwood announced. "You've seen our point defense systems in action. You've witnessed our drone capabilities. The next demonstration will include our main battery. I suggest you consider very carefully whether your pride is worth the lives of your remaining crew." The tactical display showed the human drones forming new patterns around the fleet, creating geometric shapes that seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist. The science officer's scales had gone complete white. A sign they'd seen something their mind simply couldn't process. "Excellence," they whispered. "According to these readings, they're not just bending space. They're writing new laws of physics. Local ones, just for us." High Commander Zextal had never felt more lost. Their lifetime of military experience, their countless victories, their absolute faith in Gatherian superiority, All of it crumbled as they watched another ship simply cease to exist, its matter scattered across multiple dimensions by technologies that shouldn't exist. Shields at maximum. Evasive pattern Delta 7. They ordered, but the words felt hollow even as they left their mouth. The Thermopyla's main battery finally opened fire, but instead of conventional weapons, the human ship released what looked like bubbles of pure darkness, spheres where light itself seemed to die. What are those? Sub-Commander Vixna asked, their voice trembling. The science officer's response was barely audible. They're creating localized regions where our universe's physical constants don't apply. Excellence, they're not just breaking the laws of physics, they're rewriting them. They watched in horror as one of these spheres approached a Gatherian cruiser. The ship's quantum shields, the most advanced defense technology known to their species, didn't even register the threat. The sphere passed through the barriers, as if they were made of smoke, and then the cruiser didn't explode. It didn't break apart. Instead, it simply transformed. In the space of a heartbeat, its crystalline structure rearranged itself into something that looked more like abstract art than a warship. The crew's final transmission spoke of reality itself becoming fluid around them. Excellence. The tactical officer's scales had gone nearly transparent with fear. 3 more ships just. They couldn't even find the words to describe what they were seeing. Captain Blackwood's voice returned, still maintaining that professional calm that now seemed more terrifying than any display of anger. Your quantum technology is impressive, Commander Zextal, but you've built your entire civilization on a single branch of physics. We had to explore them all. The remaining Gatherian ships tried to coordinate their fire, launching a barrage of quantum torpedoes that could have reduced a planet's crust to slag. The human drones moved in perfect formation, creating geometric patterns that seemed to fold through hidden dimensions. Where their fields intersected, the torpedoes simply vanished, emerging light years away as harmless radiation. The mathematics. The science officer was muttering to themselves. The complexity of what they're doing. Each drone is calculating and generating fields that would take our most advanced computers years to model. And they're doing it in real time, coordinating across the entire battle space. Zextal watched as another sphere of darkness approached one of their heavy cruisers. This time, they saw the effect in slow motion through their enhanced optical sensors. The laws of physics simply change. Quantum fields collapsed. Strong nuclear forces rewrote themselves. Matter existed in multiple states simultaneously. The ship's crystal structure, unable to maintain cohesion under these new rules, transformed into something that could only be described as a 4-dimensional sculpture. All ships, retreat, Zextal finally ordered, their voice cracking. Full power to engines. Get us out of this system. But the human drones had already surrounded the fleet in a perfect sphere. Space itself seemed to curve around them, creating a bubble from which there was no escape. The Thermopyla's main gun rotated, bringing its full battery to bear on the trapped Gatherian fleet. An excellent decision, Commander, Blackwood said. But I'm afraid we're not quite finished with today's demonstration. There's one more lesson that the Gatherian Empire needs to learn about humanity. The space around the human ship began to ripple again, but this time it was different. The very fabric of reality seemed to flex and bend, creating patterns that made the Gatherian crew's eyes water just looking at them. You see, Commander, Blackwood continued, everything we've shown you so far. Those were just our defensive systems. Now, let me show you why Earth has remained undiscovered for so long, and why that was a mercy to the galaxy. The Thermopyla's final demonstration began with a whisper. At first, the Gatherians didn't even notice anything had changed. Then the science officer's console erupted with alerts. Excellence. Their voice cracked with terror. Local space-time coherence is breaking down. They're creating some kind of reality storm. Around the trapped Gatherian fleet, space itself began to fragment. It wasn't just bending or warping anymore. It was shattering into crystalline shards of reality, each one containing its own set of physical laws. Ships that strayed too close to these boundaries found parts of themselves existing in multiple states at once. Remarkable analysis. Captain Blackwood's voice cut through their terror. What you're seeing is a localized reality cascade. We discovered it by accident during our early experiments with space-time manipulation. It's quite beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful was not the word any Gatherian would have used. Through their viewport, they could see the very fabric of space fracturing, like breaking glass. Each shard reflected light differently, creating an aurora of impossible colors that human eyes could never have perceived. Please, Zextal's pride had finally shattered completely. We surrender. Just make it stop. Of course, Commander. The reality storm calmed immediately, though the memory of it would haunt the survivors forever. We accept your surrender. You and one escort vessel will be allowed to return to your empire. The rest of your fleet will remain here, transformed into a monument. The science officer's scales had gone beyond white to almost translucent. Excellence. These readings, the power required to generate that effect. They could have done this at any time. They were just playing with us before. Not playing, Blackwood corrected, still monitoring their internal communications. Teaching. Every demonstration was carefully chosen to make a point. The relativistic missiles showed you that simple physics can defeat advanced shields. The drones prove that your understanding of space-time is limited, and the reality storm. That was to ensure you understand just how far behind you really are. As if to emphasize her point, the space around the remaining Gatherian ships began to clear. Through the dissolving reality storm, they could see what had happened to their other vessels. Each one had been transformed into a beautiful but impossible structure. Ships twisted into Mobius strips of crystal, matter frozen in states that should not exist, crew members preserved like insects in amber, but existing in multiple dimensions at once. Why? Zextal found their voice again. Why show us mercy? Why let any of us leave? Because that's the final lesson, Commander. For the first time, Blackwood's voice carried a note of real emotion. Humanity could have remained hidden. We could have let your empire expand until you found us, then eliminated you entirely. Instead, we chose this demonstration, because unlike you, we don't seek conquest. We don't want your territory or your technology. What we want is understanding. The remaining Gatherian ship's sensors suddenly came back online, but what they showed made no sense. The thermopila was simultaneously in 100 different positions, each one equally real, each one capable of unleashing the same reality-breaking powers they'd just witnessed. Return to your empire, Commander Zextal, Blackwood said. Show them your sensor logs. Let them see what happens when they find a species that took a different path to the stars. And give them this message. Earth's space is off-limits, but we are open to peaceful contact. The choice between diplomacy and destruction will always be yours. As the two surviving ships limped away from the solar system, their crews would never forget the final sight of their former fleet. Now a garden of impossible sculptures orbiting Jupiter, each one a monument to human power and mercy. The quantum fields that had been their greatest achievement now seemed like children's toys compared to humanity's casual manipulation of reality itself. The Gatherian Empire's response would echo through history. For the first time in their existence, they voted unanimously to establish diplomatic relations before any military action. And in the archives of their species, a new phrase entered their language. Human physics, meaning something that followed no known rules but worked anyway.